To be punctual here, we got a jam-packed meeting. I'll call this meeting to order at 10 o'clock, October 2nd, 2024. And we get started off with a roll call, please.
Oh, sorry. All right. Chair Rocha,
Oh, here.
Vice Chair Kennedy. Here. Member Fan is not going to be here today. I don't know why. Yeah, brain. Member Goodman.
Here.
Member Kraxberger.
Here.
Member Teeters is also excused. And Member Urias.
Here.
All right.
Perfect. Thanks, Amber. All right. So we'll hop on over to discussion and action items. 3A, approval of minutes from the September 4th, 2024 Workforce Housing Committee meeting. Do we entertain a motion?
A motion that we approve them.
All right. Motion we approve. We have a second.
I'll second.
Nicole second. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Nope. All right. Minutes are approved. We'll hop on over to 3B, presentation, discussion, and possible action regarding the City of Prescott Workforce Housing Policy. Go ahead, Amber.
So this part we're actually going to keep pretty sweet and simple. Over the next couple months, we will be bringing you each section once the headers are approved to show you examples from other jurisdictions and a draft for what could be ours that we'll be able to dissect. So today is just, are there any headers that you guys feel are missing? Are there any that you can, and we can kind of, are there any you would like rephrased? Is there anything missing? So we aren't going to dig into them today, just making sure we hit all of the nails on the heads for this part.
Go for it, Luther.
Did we ever talk about putting something in here that kind of pulled back some of the regulatory hoops? I know there's, we talked about incentive programs and introductions and whatnot, but is there something that we can put in there that says you don't have to jump through as many hoops if you've engineered this plan? I know that the pre-approved plans, but that's a different animal.
Yeah, so that'll fall, and there's going to be a couple areas that'll actually hit that. So we'll have the development fee reduction, prioritization will be kind of part of that too, of tactics we can look at to have staff meet in person versus all the other options, as well as the project qualifications, and then I feel like there's one other one, but and the timeframes. So so that'll get hit in a couple different areas of anywhere we can try to remove those.
Yeah, I think you're almost referring to like development standards, right? Like almost getting rid of some of those like parking requirements, landscaping requirements, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Bonus densities, all that. Yeah. So
Setbacks.
setbacks. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just kind of.
I actually had sorry, hold on. I did actually have that in my notes too. I said if we could add modification of development standards for workforce housing projects that fall under incentives.
Okay, read that one more time.
Modification of development standards.
Okay.
Which is a George's alley.
Incentives, okay.
Anything else that you, and again, these are to vote on to approve them. So this is the time to chat about whether you guys feel like there's something missing in those, or if there's anything, like for example, I have revitalization and infill incentives. We've talked about it quite a bit. It's a pretty complex, it's almost like its own set of another, to me, it just seems quite like a beast to then get into establishing guidelines and standards and stuff for infill revitalization. Maybe there's an incentive to go, if you're an infill lot utility ready, that's simple enough. But for revitalization, my opinion is that it's probably too complex, but.
It almost needs to be its own category.
Okay.
When that can also fall under the community awareness, just from the standpoint that, it doesn't incur impact fees if you're redoing a building that already has utilities, so there's a little bit of stuff there that we can say, hey, this is a benefit to a developer.
But you're right, it is a big one.
Yeah, the infill part I think is the easy one to wrap our head around because that's just saying maybe it's baked into the policies to incentivize. I mean, for one, the developer builder gets a break on impact fees, right? Because that's an infill lot. The thing to couple that with is that there's not. I think originally we were hoping that the city would also have like a plethora of lots infill, and that's not the case. So it's also in private property that this would kind of work. Right, like someone buys a piece of property, and they rehab what's existing, or they demo it out and they put something new. So I'm on the infill incentives. I feel like those are pretty clear, cut and dry. The revitalization part, I feel like, I don't know. It's taken us a while just to get to this point in the policy. I feel like revitalization is going to demand so much more detail, and to me, that almost seems like, do we include it in the policy to state some language about it? And then maybe the hope is that this staff person or housing manager would be able to like take charge of it and we kind of remove it from this list, or I don't know. What's your thoughts?
I don't agree with removing it from the list. I think that you're gonna attract a lot of community buy-in under the revitalization incentive portion, because when people think of workforce housing, unfortunately, there's that misconception of low income. And then they start coming up with these concerns that are not valid, like this is going to devaluate my neighborhood. And so I think that the revitalization portion is going to be your biggest instrument to combat that.
Anybody? You guys are quiet today.
And we don't have to vote on them today.
Yeah.
We can bring you guys back a more updated list too at the next one, and even start digging into the first couple sections.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I like what you're saying to that, Amber. I mean, voting seems very like concrete. This is going to be a work in progress. And I think we have a really strong outline, but I think to know we have the freedom that we might be adding or editing things slightly makes sense to me.
Perfect. That's easy.
Cool. One other thing I had on here is that I feel like, and I want to get your guys' thoughts, is moving the zoning under incentive programs. Because it's kind of like, it's separated, but really the, like.
All right.
Well, that's what, yeah.
Most
that's
of
what I
what's
mean.
listed would be some kind of an incentive.
Yeah, like density bonus, the include workforce housing inclusion or percentage of projects, like all that to me speaks incentive. So, and just in reviewing other municipalities' policies and stuff, it just seems like zoning is actually the largest one under the incentive program. So, could we just make that change? It's a simple change. What do you guys feel about employee incentives?
Are they city employees? Which employees?
Well, I'm thinking it's the city, right?
Yeah, we won't have a lot of.
Say on that.
We can control city employees, but there's nothing saying that we couldn't do an education incentive for the workforce as a whole. So I know we have the education like guidebooks that we plan on doing, but yeah, I don't know if there might be incentives out there that we could offer to the workforce of, hey, if you can prove that you're working in the city limits, we can do something. I don't know what the something is, but I like the thought of being able to look at something that can not just help city employees, which is great, but also the workforce as a whole. I
What
think
you
we
said
could get
about
creative.
education is very significant, because from a legal standpoint, we have to make sure that we're abiding by equal housing. And so by making it an education-based incentive, that they have to fulfill that education, then you're covering yourself from any allegations that you're discriminating on any particular census.
So it might be employee incentive and education.
Yeah.
That's almost what it rings like to me, is like an employee education, because employee incentives also makes it seem like we're kind of somewhat creating an incentivized package for an employee, maybe. I don't know.
Well, it can just be, talking to employers, the city being one of them, and saying, hey, here are some ways that, we've come up with that, you can assist with down payments or whatever the option may be that can help a worker get into housing and get a long-term employee that way rather than having
Yeah.
turnover, like we've talked about with the police department, the fire department.
Yeah,
Hey, spend the money on the house rather than retraining.
for sure. Cool. All right. Pre-approved plans. I think the only other thing I see on here is, actually, no, sorry, you have that in here. Definition, eligibility, project qualification. Okay, yeah, that's all covered. All right. Anything else on the headers? You guys, it's like to Nicole's point, I mean, it's not set in stone. It's a good start, I think, as an outline.
I like it.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Move on over to the next item here.
Which I don't see our water friends yet today.
For what? For water folks?
Yeah, so they're supposed to come and talk about kind of the 2016 water policy, which was included in the packet, and if it was realistic or possible for us to create a recommendation to council to add something into the policy for workforce housing, since we had one in there before. Talking to George, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but it sounds like in the 2016 policy, there was nothing to make the workforce allocation any easier to get than just normal. So people went with normal because why not? So it's something that for this committee, we wouldn't create a water policy to go in our policy. What we would do is work with the water issues subcommittee and the water department to recommend an added verbiage or an added section to the water policy, and then we would refer to that in our policy. That was just as government sounding as you can make it. So, but
Well,
I don't
perfect.
know where our water people are, but if anybody had read it and has any questions or comments on it, we can have them bring a draft in the future.
Were they planning on attending?
They were, so. Would you mind calling?
Can we come back to that item?
Yeah,
Yeah, can you skip and come back? Okay. Are you guys good to skip and come back? That way at least we're kind of hearing it from the water folks?
Yeah.
All right. All right, so we'll come back to item 3C, and then we'll head over to 3D now. Presentation and discussion regarding fees, fee schedules, and permit review timeframes. Let me see here.
and George,
So what we got was in our packet.
We just gave you a few examples
Yeah.
of how projects are feed when they come through, multifamily and single-family projects. We broke the single-family projects into mass production home projects because typically they have pre-approved house plans. So they submit a house plan to us. It goes through a review process, and they may have 4 or 5 of those plans, and they just build those 5 plans over and over again in a subdivision. So the review process on the city side is really short. All of the time we spend reviewing an individual house plan is done up front, and then when each permit's pulled, the time frame is very short. There's a review of the site grading, there's a review of the foundation plans, and then out the door the permit goes because the house has already been reviewed previously. So we would, from a city perspective, encourage anyone attempting to build workforce affordable housing to follow a model plan process. That's what we call it, a model plan process, to follow that model plan process. Bring us 3, 4 floor plans and let us do a review of those. And then from that point forward, you just build those same floor plans over and over again, put different exterior finishes on them, and the process on the city side is fast and much less expensive because we really charge you for only one house review, even if you're building 30 houses.
Gotcha.
So that one was an easy one. The other 2 we looked at, there was a question regarding the Multifamily costs, that's for the building. We generally permit buildings. So if it's 8 units, then that cost is for 8 units. It's not 8 individual unit prices. It's for the whole 8 because we're permitting the building that contains 8 units. And for single family, the custom homes, mostly because we spend a lot of time dealing with code compliance with the design and going back and forth with the developer, it takes a lot longer. And the cost is higher than if you were to come in and do the mass production building because the cost per home is usually much higher for a custom home. So kind of to give you an outline of where the city's costs come from, it's also telling to look at the amount of time it takes to get a permit for each of those types of development and how much of that time is spent in the city's hands and how much is spent in the builder's hands. It's generally we're less than 50% of the time that it's in our hands. For those of you who are developers across the table from me, stop telling people that we take too long. Most of the time is on you. If you have questions about these, the idea was to give you an example so you can see how we price things out and why the prices are what they are. Generally speaking, the bigger the project, the more expensive the project is. As far as an individual unit or a multifamily building, the higher the price is. Usually for multifamily, much of that price is the impact fees, just because the multifamily projects are generally going to have a larger water meter, larger connection to city utilities, and the impact fees are generally based on water meter sizes. So bigger project, bigger meter, higher impact fees.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Happy to answer questions if you have specifics. So.
Yeah, thanks, George. If we could, so there's two areas that we probably should discuss. One is the fees themselves. One is the time frame. I think those are the two things that we really wanted to hammer out today. So if we can start with the fees conversation first, that would kind of help us keep us in line here. So the 8 units, I think I totaled it up. It was $40,723 for this 8-unit apartment complex. Which was roughly like 2.7% of value or something based on this value of 1.5 million.
Right.
So that just get us at least to talk big numbers here. I think one of the things I guess I'll just throw some ideas and some concepts out there for the committee, and then you guys just kind of take it as it goes. To me, I feel like there would be actually, well, before I even go there, I have a question for legal. Are impact fees reimbursable?
I don't know what you mean, but flesh it out a
A
little.
developer comes in and pays the impact fees when they're due and performs on the project, brings it to workforce housing. The agreement says 10% of the project is, or 20 units. Whatever it is, the developer performs, and then the impact fees are reimbursable to that developer at, say, CFO or close of escrow. I'm only asking because I've read it in other municipalities.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think the purpose of the development fee is to pay for something that's already been analyzed as to be the amount of money that the impact will create regarding the new growth. So I in my mind, it doesn't make sense that they would be rebatable.
Okay. So I guess my thought process is for fees, let's just use this example of $40,000. It's almost $41,000 for here. I mean, there's different ways to do it. Either we waive all of them minus impact fees. We recommend that they get discounted if you fall under the workforce housing criteria and you can utilize this incentive package, it gets discounted, right? And this is maybe another budget finance legal question, is it possible to say, okay, this is $40,000, you fall under the workforce housing policy and incentive package, we can reduce that by 50%. Now you're looking at 20. is there a way to essentially divert those funds instead of going into wherever this money goes into to like a fund, the workforce housing fund? Is that a possibility to fund,
Just a reminder, because I know we've talked about this before, but I think it's important to remember, the city doesn't charge any fees that are intended to be profit. So all of the fees we charge are reimbursement for something. Impact fees are reimbursement for the city's infrastructure to enlarge the infrastructure to handle the new development. All of the other fees are to basically pay for staff time processing that we do for the permits. So if we discount anything, that discount is paid for out of the general fund. So the fees will get paid, whatever this calculation comes up to, get paid from somewhere. Transferring monies from a developer paying the city for an expense on the city side into a separate fund that could be used for workforce housing is basically moving money out of the general fund into that other fund, just so that you keep that in mind.
Sure.
So we don't make money on any of the permits we issue or any of the fees we collect. It's a break even at best, and usually on the city review time side, we don't break even. So the taxpayers are paying some of the cost of our reviewers and all of our various departments to review a building permit. Whether or not council wants to adopt a policy to shift money into a separate account would be a question that you should broach with council. So it wouldn't directly come from like a rebate of the fees paid. It would be a shift of money that was collected into this separate fund. Does it make sense to look at it from that perspective rather than treating this as a separate funding source?
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Connie.
Connie can tell me, and I'm sorry I'm late doctor's appointment. So one of the things about impact fees, as you know, we're dealing with this right now in council. And we've really done a deep dive, and as a contractor, I've paid them for 40 years. They are to mitigate the impacts of growth. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't come forward with a fabulous workforce housing project and ask the council at large to absorb the impact fees. But remember, the minute you take the impact fee away from the developer that's creating the impact, it goes on to the backs of the taxpayer. So the taxpayer pays or the developer pays. So that's a decision. Now, with a feasibility study, again, if you have a great workforce housing project, you come in front of council, you show the feasibility study, and the council decides, you know what, we're going to gain more than we're going to lose, so we're going to go ahead and give you a reduction on the impact fees. That's something that can happen and has happened, and I think what you say you're reading, I think you may be reading that, because it doesn't go away. All these infrastructure needs, police and fire, still has to be paid for by somebody. So that's the impact fee situation.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm not too concerned about the impact fees themselves because it feels like there's a lot of red tape around those because they're statute, they're more complicated. Bottom line is there has to be a give from the city at some point to help produce or incentivize workforce housing. We're delusional if we think we're going to sit here for another 6 months and then think that there's nothing to be given here to make a difference. Randy used an example of a unit that will never pencil. So if it doesn't pencil for the developer builder and we have fees here, now I 100% understand the logic and the process of things get paid. Nothing's just going to go away, right? So the general fund's going to cover the absorption, right, which is to me the city's investment to help stimulate workforce housing is to go, okay, we're going to collect $40,000 of these fees, which are a break even. Let's charge them 20 and absorb 20. Now it sounds like a partnership. Now it's more like we talk about this whole private public partnership stuff. That's where it actually becomes real, right? So now you go and say, okay, so you follow all the criteria, you follow the policy, and we're going to discount you 50% of non-impact fees, right? The impact fees could stay. Everything else maybe are, the building permits, the electrical, mechanical, plumbing, fire, permits, all those things, right? We say, okay, that's the incentive. We'll discount your fees for 50%, and then we're going in this together because now you're paying us $20,000, and then we're absorbing the $20,000. My thinking in trying to figure out some solution to start putting some skin behind all this stuff is to also just put a timeline in it. I don't think we're also saying get the city on the line for 10, 20 years indefinitely or whatever to be covering this. It's just a means to be able to say, you go 50, I go 50, and then maybe we can even utilize the funds to start building up a side account that at some point will be able to fund more things. Maybe that fund account in a year or two, maybe it's up to $100,000. Well, guess what? Now we can utilize those funds to maybe reduce for a project 75% of fees, right? And that's a public-private partnership. That's where it starts coming together as that structure. So I guess I follow the logic behind like, hey, you waive it, it gets paid. You reduce it, it gets paid. It's a taxpayer liability and burden, 100%. The lack of workforce housing is also a taxpayer burden, 100%. That's why we're here. So that seems to be, in my way, that just seems to start at least giving this public-private partnership some skin, if you will, right? So that's just my thought process. I'm not speaking for the entire committee. I just know that if fees are a way to be able to make it a little more simple for a developer builder to come in and say, we're reducing them, right, for the cause here, and you're coming in with me on this partnership, it's a good first step, in my opinion.
John, can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me add to that.
How dare you, Randy?
Wow, it's pretty intense. As from a builder's perspective, the best thing that I think the city can do for anybody that's going to step up and do workforce housing is to expedite this. If you look at a 6-month turnaround and you're paying debt service on a project, and I'm just going to use round numbers, let's say you decide to build a project, you've costed it out, is $10 million. Look at the debt service you're paying on a 30-day basis for that $10 million you're going to hold for 6 months while you're waiting to get a permit. The best thing they can do for you is time is money, is to reduce the time that you're in the permit phase. The whole time you're waiting for that permit, that debt service is not going away. So if they can shorten your time from 6 months to 3 months, add up what you're paying on a monthly basis for your $10 million. That is the biggest and best thing they can do for you. And then, of course, we talked about this in addition to your profit margin, your bottom line is attracting that workforce housing grant money. That is going to go towards your profit. It just is. But again, expediting the whole project is going to save you a ton of money. So who's good at math real quick? Because now I have a smartphone and I'm really stupid at math. I used to be great. But do the debt service on $10 million or $20 million project and then divide that by the 6 months that you're holding that money. That's a lot of money. So if they can expedite this, or maybe another way to do it is to bring your project ahead, get all your permits, and then start off with your loan. So your loan does not start the clock ticking and paying until you have your pre-approved permit to go forward. But that's a lot of money that I think they can help you with.
Yeah.
Connie, I agree with you. And I agree with you. And I think we need both. I think
Yeah.
we need efficiencies in time, and I think we need reduction in fees. And however that pencils out, the reality is we're paying one way or the other. Our community is going to pay dearly if our city does not invest in the future of workforce housing. And so one thing I was going to suggest is that maybe we look at some sort of a sliding scale, depending on different factors. And I know we haven't gotten into that yet, but what does, the percentage of the project look like? If it's 20% of the project is attainable, maybe that's a starting point, or 10%. And then it goes all the way up to, is the entire project attainable? And for how long? And we use those factors to help us decide what kind of a incentive they're going to receive.
There's a string attached to all that government money, and it's pretty laid out.
Yeah, I was gonna propose a suggestion. Listening to both sides, understanding that, we can't just make the expense disappear. That just doesn't work that way in accounting. However, we're operating from a disadvantage here. Under these examples, we have a breakdown, line item per line item. We have a tangible study of what the economic impact is and why we need these impact fees. What we don't have is an economic study that does the same thing, that would give us that tangible result of what it's costing the city to not have a workforce, okay? So if we take into consideration that accounting is simply moving things from this side of the column to this side of the column, hypothetically speaking, what if we had an economic study of that impact? And we would say, if this is for a workforce, each workforce unit is worth X amount of dollars. Now the bean counters have something to work with. So my proposal is, what would it take to get something like this established to create a value for each workforce member we're accommodating?
Yeah, that's something we could put the new employee or the grant funding toward, having that included in those studies that we're already going to commission.
Okay.
On the fees, I like the idea of tying something to incentives, like, hey, we'll refund you 50% of your permit fee if you perform on these things with these timeframes. I think that's part of a participation. You get the whole fee up front, so if they don't perform and they don't do what they say they were going to do as far as workforce, then you don't give them their 50% or 20% or whatever it is back. So be it. It didn't pencil for workforce housing, so I had to jack up the rents, and so you don't get your $20,000 back. I think, that's something that the city would be more apt to, I think, agree with, from the standpoint that this is actually something we saw performed, good job. And that incentivizes the developer to actually do that. As far as impact fees, I still do have concern. I mean, we tout these as police and fire, police and fire, police and fire. The fire impact fee is 1.4% of the impact fee. The police impact fee is 1.6% of the impact fee. The majority of this is water and sewer, and I get it, those are things that are super important, but we all hang the hat on police and fire, but somehow those guys are getting the shaft on this. I don't know if there's more we can talk about on that, or if it's just that is what it is.
I just wanted to mention that there is a distinction between the general fees and the impact fees, where it's going to be much easier for the city to incentivize the general, because those are city funds that are passed by resolution. They're not necessarily tied to the impact fee, development impact fee statute. So, and I know we talked about this in the past, that's where it's going to be at least a little bit easier to waive fees on the general fees versus the impact fee.
John, that proposal I showed you guys last meeting was a 10-year proposal. It's basically a partnership between city and private. So what if we don't reduce the fees at all, but we give them time? In other words, the city finances those fees over a spread out period of time, because my properties are going to go up in rental value every 2 years. So every 2 years, my net will increase. So I could take some of that net increase and pay some of these fees that I should have paid way back when I developed, but I didn't have to upfront that money. And now I'm paying it over time, maybe 10 years, 5 years, I don't know. So don't reduce the fees at all, just finance them. Give them time. Time's money.
I like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that, Randy. That's actually another option for sure, is we eliminate the talk about the waiving, the discounting, the reimbursement, and then you work with a workforce housing project where you defer the fees. I would think that's also an easier, softer landing, if you will, on the legalities of the taxpayer, right? To be like, okay, well, clearly we can just show the fees never changed. That's what we charge everyone. But part of the incentive program for workforce housing is that they're deferring that out And maybe what we do is a scale, right? I mean, in reviewing other municipalities' policies, it seems like they're incentivizing the more percentage of workforce housing units in a project. Because I think, quite honestly, I don't know. I'm kind of dumb. So I feel like I had a light bulb moment when you gave us that project where I was like, well, that is not penciling for 100% of the units. If you have a market rate project with 200 units and you're giving 20% of those units, right, which is what, like 40 of those units now, workforce housing, there's maybe more of a chance that on the 80% of the market rate is going to help subsidize some of that, right, for you to pencil it out. So I think I think we need to start thinking that it's not necessarily we're going to build something from the ground up, all 100% workforce housing units. That, to me, that's almost a pipe dream, right? Based on your figures on that project. So even if it's a scale and we say, okay, you build 10% of workforce housing units, and then you get, 5-year deferral on fees, right? You pay
10% of your fee.
Yeah, exactly. Defer, yeah, or 20, and then you build 20%, and then 20% gives you 7.5 years, whatever, right? That might be something that's more palatable. I mean, for everybody.
Well, I did come up with a way to make that work. The 6 units.
Pushing it out.
No. It was 100% financed through the bank. They're charging 7.25% interest on the money. So when I looked at it personally, I thought, well, wait a minute, what if I'm the bank? In other words, I don't borrow a dime, I do it with my own money. Now, I'm the developer. Take me off this board, I'm the developer. And I'm charging the 7.25% interest on my money. That's not terrible. And I get that for 10 years, because it's a 10-year deal with the city, right? So I'm not making any money on the rent as a property owner. I'm making 7.25% interest as the lender. And then in 10 years, when the property goes out of workforce and back to market value, there's a substantial increase in value that I just talked to George about through appreciation. So then you got to go back and calculate that appreciation factor into your 7.25 that you earned, and it's probably a whole lot higher. It's not a bad deal, but you got to have $1.1 million cash to do it.
Or a partnership.
Well, that too, but I've showed it to a couple of my heavyweight buddies, and we're talking about it.
Yeah, that's definitely one model for sure.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Don, go ahead.
So we have a builder out of the valley that's up here right now, Lafferty. Have you guys been following his project? We just had them come in front of planning and zoning.
And water issues yesterday.
The water issues yesterday. You might want to go back and look at the videos on that. Are you familiar with him? Okay. So he's I think he was 10 or 12% below market at the end of the day, which isn't a ton, but it's a start. The other thing I wanted to bring up, because I think he talks a lot about it in detail. So go back and look at those videos if you want to see how he's going to do it.
He has offered to come before you to talk about his projects and how he tries to keep them down to below market rate, although he's a market rate developer. He keeps some of his projects below that for workforce level housing. So we can probably arrange to get him back in front of you at some point to hear from him.
Does
We've
he
had some
receive-
presentations prior by people who were doing projects like this. It's just his timing was bad. You had big agendas for the next 3 or 4 meetings, and he had a project to pursue. So he's
Does
going to
he-
be going before council October 22nd, I think,
Yeah.
when he'll be in front of
And-
you.
and John-
After that, he should have time.
One of the other points I wanted to make real quick too is in terms of the impact fees. Have you seen the breakdown on what our current impact fee is and what our proposed impact fee is going to be coming forward? Did they give that to you? Okay, good. Okay, so we have had artificially low impact fees since 2017, 18, and of course then 19. It has not produced any workforce housing. When you're talking about a $10 to $20 million project, most of the builders, sure, if they can get it, they're going to ask. But it doesn't happen all the time. It's a very small part of it. But you can see that it produced nothing in the last 15 years in terms of workforce housing. It's produced a lot of building and a lot of builders trying to hurry up and get in under the the wire, but that didn't benefit workforce housing at all.
Yeah.
Just a note.
Yeah, I mean, and just to couple with that too, though, I don't think any municipality just by lowering impact fees is doing anything for workforce housing. I think when you have a dominating market, a strong market that just keeps going up and up and up, no one's going to touch workforce housing. So I think the bigger difference, or the difference now between the times you're talking about and now, though, is that we're not just saying we're keeping impact fees low. We're trying to put together an entire incentive package, right? I mean, I don't want to cross over to water, but water was coupled in with duplexes, multifamily apartments, and everything. Well, if any developer or builder is going to come into the city, they're not touching workforce housing. There's no money in it. So the water was not incentivized to produce workforce housing either. So, so it's like, yeah, I understand that impact fees were low. And so that was just a handout to builders and developers to maybe make sense more of the numbers for them and then continue to build market rate. But I mean,
Now you're going to pay for it.
yeah. So, well, I mean, we got a couple of thoughts on the table, right? You got the deferral part. You got the
Sliding scale.
the discounted
The sliding scale, depending on
the sliding scale.
unit.
I mean, personally, it happens often. I change my mind just in talking with you guys, but like, I do like Randy's idea on the deferral part because I think it's something more palatable for all parties to be able to go, we're not changing the fees. The fees need to be coming in, but we're going to work with you with time because time is money for you. So, it's just maybe now jotting some ideas of if we want to do the deferral. And to me, the scale makes a lot of sense because it rewards more units the more you get, right? It's just a smart way to keep in check. If you open it for everybody and say, well, if you just meet 10%, you get this, full deferral for 10 plus years or whatever. So I mean, I support that for sure. I like that idea. How do you guys feel?
Like it.
If there likes it. Nicole, you like it? Arnold. Oh no. Oh no.
Just so we're clear, it could,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh,
it could probably work for the general fees, but not necessarily the impact fees, because the impact fees are due statutorily at a certain time when the C of O is issued. So, and there's no wiggle room around that, as far as I can see.
Is that the farthest time? We have discussed this before.
There's two times in the statute. What are they, George? At time of C of O, or does anyone remember the other one? There's kind of a distinction.
Let's pick the farther one.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're relatively close in time. Certainly nothing that can be deferred 10 years out. They're due when they're kind of due.
Okay, so for clarification, we would defer with a scaling, with a kind of a scaling method. All permit engineering fees, let's just call it non-impact fees,
non-impact.
right?
Yeah.
Would be in that scale. And then we would do, and then the impact fees, I would suggest that it would be the farthest one out. So if you're saying CFO is the farthest out, that those impact fees are due and paid that have to be paid by state,
I think
by statute?
I don't remember the exact language of the statute, but I'm pretty sure Matt's right. The two things are like in very close time proximity. So I don't think you're going to save much by deferring to the latter of the two choices because it's not that much later.
Okay. But anything helps, George. But anything helps. This is a problem.
I just wanted
I think it's time of permit and then C of O, maybe. Does that make sense? The building
Maybe.
permit? Yeah.
Maybe if
But
that's
there-
the case, there could be a benefit.
Time F permit.
Right.
That's what I figured, because I remember when you mentioned it a couple meetings ago, it was like, wow, that would be helpful. I mean, to be able to save the money on impact fees for during construction, right? Then you're keeping loan costs lower. That's money, right? You're in construction for a year and a half, a year, whatever it is. That's an incentive, I feel like. That's the partnership part.
That's an easy incentive.
The other way you can do it is withdraws to keep your debt service down. So you don't take the whole amount at one time. You break it down in, I don't know, or 5 parts, 4 parts, however you phase out the construction. And then you only pay on what you're actually using. But
You mean the loan or the?
what was that?
You mean the loan or the draws as far as
I'm talking about the
payment?
loan. If you go in for a loan, you can structure that
Oh,
loan.
sure, yeah.
Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So we're good with that?
I think by deferring the fees, the city side of the fees, you want to incentivize the builder to stay in the workforce model 10 years or as long as you can. And you're kind of holding the lever a little bit on them if you finance those fees, or however long we finance them. It is, once again, a partnership, and it incentivizes the builder to stay in the workforce model longer.
So like a balloon clause that it'd be
No, not
due
just-
and payable if they deviate from the workforce housing model?
Well, yeah, it'll all be due and payable immediately.
Yeah.
Because they break their agreement with the city.
Yeah, and, yeah,
Government. If you go for grants, that, depending on the grant, that's going to tell you the terms. So we have another model of that right now up on White Spar. That builder took a 20-year loan out for senior living or whatever they called it at the time, and his 20 years was up, and he's now put it out to market. And so he's displacing a lot of those people that moved into that place with a subsidized income. So that's the thing with workforce housing. If you decide to take the grant money, it's going to be spelled out depending upon where you get that grant money. So it may say to you, you've got to hold this project in workforce housing compliance for 10 or 20 years. It depends again. So that may be your target date.
From what we've heard from the State Department of Housing, who handles the LIHTC funding, the low income tax credit funding, which funded that project and has funded several others here, they're now holding them to a 30-year period where it has to remain below market rate for that 30-year period. But that's through that particular type of grant. Wouldn't necessarily be something that we would address through a city-sponsored incentive program. Ours could be structured entirely differently.
but that could be a private agreement, right? It's a private agreement between developer, builder, and the city per project.
Right.
We haven't
For the-
discussed that
for a
yet. That's
city
in later.
incentive.
Yeah, that's
Right.
in the later stuff for all the, not the goals, but the headers that we're going to do. But essentially, there has to be, all this will be legally binding, right? I mean,
Yes.
it's going to be like a private agreement,
There will be a contract.
development agreement, whatever, between the city to enforce, this is what we're doing, and based on the incentive package from workforce housing, and this is what you're doing.
So there's also another situation where you can hire, if you've got your money at a wealth management company, for example, they can become a fund manager, and you can set up a fund that is funded through 10 of your best friends, whatever it is. They manage the fund. Are you familiar with a REIT? A REIT, when you invest in a REIT, it's a very similar model to that. So for the 30-year hold, it would be a fund that would fulfill the 30-year hold. Everybody makes money on it. It's going to be an estimated market in the beginning, but it's controlled by the fund manager. That would be the wealth management company, like that E3 Wealth Management down there used to do those. I don't know if they still do, but you can set that up, and a lot of them are doing that right now. So it's privately funded, or the city can participate, I guess, if we've got the money to do it. But basically, it's a fund, and it's managed by a fund manager, and you make a return on your money at the end of, you can have it monthly, you can have it pay out all after the 30 years. I mean, it really depends on what you want it to do.
Sure. Okay. I mean, I'm gathering we have the consensus on the fee stuff. Do we feel bullish enough at this point to come up with that scale and check this off the box or not? Because
Yeah.
all that I'm thinking about is like, Randy, you were penciling 10 years, right? So it's like, and you were 100%. So in my mind, I'm thinking 20% plus is a 10-year deferral. 20 units or 20% of the project. So if you're over 20%, you get a 10-year deferral. If you're at the 15 to 20, you get a 5-year deferral. Does that make sense? Like 10% to 20% and then 20 plus?
Have you guys all looked at the Flagstaff and Tucson examples that he was referring to earlier?
I have, yeah.
I was just thinking maybe we should take this conversation and then this meeting and then go back and look at what some of the other municipalities are doing and then come back at our next meeting with our recommendations and then really decide on what that sliding scale looks like.
Well, I was referring to rental bump. In other words, in my world, I don't see increases every year in rental values. It takes about 2 years to see the bump. So if I was on a 2-year plan with the city, every time I got a bump, then I'd make my payment that I deferred. So every 2 years, pretty soon it's paid off.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. I'm just saying that the scale is for the number of workforce housing units that fall under a project, right? Like say you're building 100 of them, and you come to the city and you go, hey, I'm going to build 10% of them will be workforce housing units. I'm going to follow the guidelines. I'm going to sign the contract. I'm going to do everything to get 10% of these units, which is the 10 units, to be workforce housing. Now you get to defer the impact fee, not the impact fees, the non-impact fees for 5 years. So it's the same thing you're following. That person's going to rent them out, do their thing,
Right.
and then it's just going to take the bulk of say $25,000 that's due at CFO, right? Those are impact fees at CFO. It's just going to take say $20,000 of all the non-impact fees of the city and just push them out for 5 years.
Well, I just wonder why we do it differently for a bigger project versus a little project. Their profit margin's pretty skinny on whatever they do, so why not give them 5 payments in 10 years? Because like I said, if it's 100 units or it's 2 units, they're only going to see increases in rent every couple of years. They're not going to see it every year. So if they made 5 payments to the city, which would take 10 years, why wouldn't you do that for big or small?
I mean, that's a point to chew on for sure.
I mean, rental profits are rental profits. Doesn't matter if it's 2 units or 200, right? If it's all workforce.
Yeah, but I think when we're tracking or kind of producing the incentive package, I do think there's some health to incentivize and give a developer builder more incentive to do more units, right? Like as a whole. Like this is only one aspect
Workforce units. You guys are saying the same thing in two different ways.
of what.
Well, Randy's saying he wants to incentivize any size of total development. You're saying the percentage of development that's workforce housing.
Correct.
Oh, yeah, because if, like in the one I pitched, it's 100% workforce. It's
Exactly.
only 6 units, but it's 100%. It's not 20 or 30, it's 100.
Yeah. So 20%, because you're over the 20%, you would get the 10-year.
Okay.
Right. And then I'm just saying that's my personal opinion is that as we're building the incentive package, that the scaling way of doing it is probably, it's almost like, it's like you want more of a benefit or an incentive, then just build more. So it's like out of your 100 units, push it to 20 units now instead of 10. And then we give you more incentive, right? So.
No, I agree.
Because I mean, I would propose that we just say, say the 10 to 20%, right? With 10% being minimum, I would think so, on any project. It's a 5-year deferral on non-impact fees.
With all due respect, I feel strongly that the only thing I really don't like about this is we're leaving the door open for the opportunity for the developer to introduce private units. And our goal is workforce housing, because when we're saying, hey, if at least 20% is, then you're getting this incentive, the unintended consequences, the developer says, hey, I can have 80% at private market. And so we need to be very careful of that. Like with Randy's scenario, it was 100%. So like Kennedy suggested moments ago, we could look at not reinventing the wheel by taking a look at what Tucson and Flagstaff did to make it work in their world and say to ourselves, how do we make sure that we can fall in line with Randy's proposal of 100%? Because our goal is to get as many units. And so in closing, along with those contributions, again, an economic study that identifies the value of each workforce housing head, so that we can take that into consideration as a credit to offset some of these and come up with a way that we're implementing a percentage that affirms to the developer that these incentives and discounts are predicated upon really targeting that objective of the workforce housing and not inviting the opportunity that you're going to have some private rentals in there.
I got a comment on this, you guys. As a guy that has a lot of rentals, I'm really careful about how much people pay because the neighbors talk to each other. So imagine you did an 80-20 split development. Those 80% of those people are going to be like, what? How much do you pay to live here? Oh, you're in workforce and you get this big discount?
Yeah.
Not going to work real well. So in my mind, my thinking, it's either workforce or it's not.
Yeah.
Because then they're all like and kind and they're all paying basically the same number. But when you try to think about an 80-20 or whatever split, I don't know. Living there might be tough on the people that are paying the full hit.
Yeah, I mean, and I get that. I just feel like, for one, all of light tech works in percentages, right? So it's been going on for a long time. Like, all the incentives of like the low income tax credit stuff is on percentages. Like, it's, you meet this criteria, we help you with this grant money, and then you do have an apartment complex that has 80 people paying market and 20% don't. So that has happened already. I mean, I understand completely the hope being that we could do all 100%. I just feel like that's an extremely difficult thing to incentivize. Like, at that point, you're only going to low income tax credit developers and builders that do vouchers, they have this whole system of how to make the make the project profitable, and that's all that's going to come to the table. If you stimulate enough of the private side to say, hey, it's like the numbers, it's an economical thing. To be able to just say we're incentivizing 100% of it, I don't think we're going to see units built, to be frank. We don't have, I wish we had like 20 Randys that would be like, I'll finance this. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think when I'm starting to review policies from other municipalities, there's a reason why they all just include it as an allocation, because they rather have 20% than 0%. You know what I mean? So it's like, for us, and that's just a conversation we need to have. I mean, when I took your project, Randy, I did numbers that week for many different scenarios, and I'm just convinced that if we're meeting, I think it was like $1,150 or something like that is what we're shooting for based on our definition for 30% of the income of the household based on HUD limits and stuff, or AMI. And so for me, I'm just thinking, like, we're not going to see that. Like, the only way we're going to see that is if someone does come in and say, I have a market rate 80% here, and I can help this market rate subsidize me a little bit on this 20%, and so I'm building 20% of the units. That's just my personal opinion, just from being in the building development world. It's a hard. What would be the worst thing is to be like, let's incentivize as much as possible, and then still fall short and not have anybody come to the table. So, I mean, I get you, I get the frustration for sure. I just think this is maybe just the step, a little baby step of opening the door to start seeing some units get built.
John, I think what you're talking about is something different than what Randy was talking about. You're talking about something on a much smaller scale. It's a quick build, and then you get rid of it, and it's done, and you move on to the next one. The profit margin, and there is a model for this. So what Randy's talking about in the long hold, if you actually did that, let's just say, what they normally do based on the inflationary rate or the increase in value is after 2 to 3 years, when you've increased a certain point, they roll it, they pull that equity out, and they infuse that back in. So at the end of the day, return on your investment after 2 to 3 years, and again, it's going to depend on the economy, you end up not paying for any of that. That comes out of the money that you extract. It's like a HELOC on a home. If you have a residential home, you can get a HELOC on it and pull your, it's the same model that he's talking about. So at the end of the day, the grace that they're giving the investors is the 10, 20, 30-year hold. But within that hold is a model of how you extract your money out of there. And it's based on the economy. So you're talking about something completely different. Again, we all have recognized we need all different kinds of things. You're talking about a financial decision that you make within your company. If you do something different that truly is non-profit, you still have to cover the cost. So how do you do it? It's an investment strategy. Okay, so this is something totally different than what you're talking about. But, you know, maybe if you think it's a good thing and you guys are trying right now to create a model for people that want to step into the workforce housing thing, maybe what we should do is invite a financial advisor come in here and tell you how get that stuff paid off with your investment. You make that money work for you. You see what I'm saying? So that, two different things, but I think we need all of it.
And I think we need to be careful not to try to reinvent what other people are doing. There are people all over the country building workforce housing. They found a way to do it. We just need to attract them here. And you attract them here with incentives, but you don't have to worry about how they're financing their project. That's up to them.
Sure, yeah. So what does the committee feel like we should, you guys want to go off of kind of Nicole's recommendation to kind of look at other municipalities?
I would say we start with that deep dive into how it's worked in microeconomic areas, Tucson, Flagstaff, and then see how we would need to maybe fine tune instead of reinvent what's already worked in others.
I went back and looked at the development fee statute and the development agreement statute. In Arizona, the development impact fees are due at the time at or before permitting. The only exception to that is if you have a development agreement, then the parties can choose to push that out to the time of C of O and payment within 15 days of that. And that was that weird little thing that was in the back of my brain that I knew there was an answer to, but I couldn't find it.
Okay.
Amber, could you send, I don't think everybody has those
Flagstaff.
policies. Okay. I know you sent it to me and John, but I don't know. Did you guys
Yeah,
send
you sent it to us early just to start looking at it, but I know it was for the future agenda stuff, but I think we're already covering that stuff now anyways, might as well. Through a development agreement. Okay, all right, you guys good to move on?
From fees?
From fees over to review times.
Thank you. Yes.
Well, I'll get your public comment right before we move on to the next item. That way you can cover either permits, fees, or review times. That's fine. Sorry, go ahead.
Review
Richard,
times.
You could take it. Review
Go ahead,
times.
you start.
No, you. Start.
I have a lot of experience with timeframes at the city. Mostly, I'm a huge fan of single-family ownership. I know we've been talking a lot about multifamily and incentivizing this or that or workforce housing. I view it as a supply and demand issue mostly. If we can increase the supply of those, less expensive houses. I know they're doing a lot in Deepwell Ranch. I just saw an advertisement today for homes starting in the 300s, so that's encouraging. I don't know how that product looks, but the big thing that I want to come back to is really from the workforce housing developer standpoint. It's from the time of starting the project before a blade hits the ground. The 9 days is correct. You can get a model plan approved in 9 days. I've done it. I've even seen some nitpicky things there that I could harp on, but I don't want to. That's really where it comes back to for me. Like when I put a single family development through the paces of getting through the city, whether it's a really expensive one or a one that's geared towards workforce housing. My goal in being part of the committee and trying to, figure out how we can tackle the workforce housing is to say, what can we do for the workforce housing developer that both ties things to the workforce housing and allows them to fast track the development plan? Because for me, that's always been 6 to 24 months to get the earthwork.
So
And
you're talking
civil
about the entitlement process rather than the permit. So we were asked for the permit times. The entitlement process is generally much longer. Yes.
Right. And that's, I get that. Right. So in my mind and as a developer's mind, that's part of the permit time. So you're not wrong and these numbers are right. My point is I want to bring that into the discussion as well. If I'm a workforce housing developer and I'm putting 20% in or whatever it is, there's got to be a way to incentivize, these plans are stamped by a civil engineer, a mechanical engineer, a structural engineer. Like, can we get these fast tracked because all these stamps are on, that's kind of my thought. Because you're right, that's going to take up 24 months and then we get the plans approved in 8 days. That's awesome. But I want to talk about the 24 months.
Mm-hmm. Is that something that would fall? Because just to be specific, there is one of the questions I had to Amber about the packet is that I didn't see, which I thought we did ask for, but I thought we were going to also take like a 10-lot subdivision, residential subdivision, and I think it was like a multifamily, a building, the building permit side of a house, and then a 10-lot subdivision to just get a sense of like what is that timeline and what are fees associated with that timeline. I don't know if you had a chance to look that up, George, but that's something we still need to get. Okay.
I did not. I can get that for you. The time frame usually is set by two aspects. One is schedule of meetings to go through a process as established by both our local code and state statute. You do a preliminary plat. That involves a submittal engineering work to a smaller degree, a lot of review time, and then through a review by the Planning Commission and then City Council. And then after that, you do way more engineering that's subject to way more engineering review on our side, and then back to the Planning Commission or in some cases directly to Council with a final plat. So those timeframes are often set by the amount of review we do. And some of what Luther was just talking about is possible that the review timeframes can be reduced a little bit if projects are submitted to us in a way that makes it easy for the city side to look at our part of it. So in most subdivisions, you're designing water and sewer lines that you're going to give to us. So they're yours while you build them, and then for the next 100 years, they belong to the city and the citizens of Prescott to pay for them. We have to repair them. So we spend a lot of scrutiny looking at that design to make sure it's something that's a good investment on the city side, that for the next 100 years, it's not going to cost the taxpayers a huge amount of money. So that's part of the reason why there's scrutiny of the engineering design, because engineers will design the most efficient system, but maybe not the one that's most efficient for a maintenance standpoint. So we look at all of those things as part of that process, and that takes a while. That's the primary time cost of a development review for a subdivision is in our review of the engineering for that subdivision. None of the other things take that long. The planning review is lot count, minimum sizes, things like that, weeks at most. Most of the other reviews are the same. It's weeks at most. All of our reviews occur concurrently, so it doesn't go to me and then to the fire department and then to engineering. We're all looking at the same plan at the same time. That saves time too, because we didn't used to do it that way. We didn't have software that allowed it. We had paper plans that had to be handed from one person to the other in order to do a review, and we don't do that any longer. So we can probably shorten those timeframes considerably depending on maybe using model concepts in plans that meet our requirements in advance. We tell you what pipe sizes and types to use, or we tell you in advance that you have to submit a design that has a pressure relief valve at a certain location because we know where the pressure zones are, things like that. I don't know that it's going to shave off a huge amount of time in the process, but we could probably shave some off. And I know any time is money, so shaving any of the time off can help.
Well, sorry.
Go ahead, Randy.
For a mid-level builder, let's get some clarity here because I heard a misspeak a while ago. And by the way, what a racket you and APS have because you get all that free stuff from us developers. But the way this works is you don't get any funding at my level until you permit. I don't know about you guys. So all that time between with design, purchasing the land, and actually permitting it and getting it approved, it's all cash. And it's dead money. I'm not earning a dime on that money. It's just getting consumed, and I won't see the return on that until the development's completely done way on the other end. So there is no interest on bank loan because they won't loan until you permit it, right? But it is dead money for the developers. So to support what you said, if that can be sped up, that's a huge benefit.
I put a time value on it. So like Connie was saying, you could put your money in the market. I say, if I'm going to put, $1 million into this land,
Right.
it's making me zero for the 24 months that it takes me to get through, when in reality, in any market fund or any money market fund, it'd be at 4, 5, 6, 20%. Money market funds are at 4.4 right now, so you could use that, but the general stock market's 15. So that's the time value money that I'm talking about.
I agree.
How much time do you think is actual review time, George? We'll just slice it up in the entitlement stages. So let's just say pre-app, site plan stuff, or say a zoning, right? A rezone, prelim plat to final plat. Like what in that entitlement stage is like really a good amount of review time that you think the city's putting into it?
So generally speaking, and these were the examples we gave you kind of show the balance between the time it's in our hands and the time it's not. It's not far off for development side projects to have the same kind of time frame. And I'm sure all of you understand that when we tell you it's going to take 3 weeks to do a plan review, we're not reviewing your plan for 3 weeks. It's 3 weeks minus 3 days to get to you. That's what the time frame is. And then 3 days to actually review your plans. For a subdivision, it's much more complicated, and the review time is probably several weeks of a reviewer's time spent on that project, again, depending on the scale of the project. So, I don't know, you spend a lot of time standing in a queue waiting to get to our reviewers. The only way to speed that up is either take you out of order, which pushes someone else back in the queue, or adding reviewers, which is adding additional staff, and that doesn't seem likely a current situation right now. So typically what we would do to try to shorten the time frame is to get more, like the model home process, more pre-approved components that you can insert into your project that we've already looked at and we know meet our requirements. I don't think that we've done that with most of our engineering designs. Generally, when we get a plan in, we start from scratch as if we'd never seen a pipe in the ground, and we do a review of it. Preparing pre-prepared components that you can include can save time, and that may be something that we can do. So,
That's huge.
I would propose that we consider pushing workforce to the front of the line. Now, I know that's going to make guys like me mad, right?
yes.
But in 3 years, once you educated me and I got used to it, am I still mad about it? Just the way business is done now, I'm used to it. But for a few years, you're going to have some grumbling,
Yeah.
but then we're all going to get used to it. And that's going to solve a lot of this right here. Push them to the front of the line because they're bringing what we need to the city. And it doesn't cost a dime to do that.
No, that actually would be the best approach to decrease the amount of time we're holding the plans and increase the amount of time they're back in your hands to make corrections if they're
Right.
necessary.
Yeah, I would propose the two things is that, right? Moving it up to the top of the line, and two is to give it some sort of now I get the back and forth thing. You can't control the applicant's engineers, but you can control how quickly the city staff will review it. So even if you're like, hey, you submit the plans as top of the line and you'll get a response in 14 days, no later than, right? Or 10 days, whatever it is. I think that would add even more. Now, granted, it's uncomfortable. All this is uncomfortable. People are going to find out, oh, well, I'm pushed out of the line or whatever. Back to Connie's point, though, what have we done in the last 20 years to do anything about workforce housing? If we don't change anything, nothing's going to change, right? Everyone's going to be in the queue. Everyone's going to be fighting for who's the next one over and the next one over, and why is this guy going to this, that, and but whatever. And to me, it's a complete, the cost to benefit. I mean, it might even impact me too, right? I'm in the queue and I'm like, oh, there's 3 projects in front of me. Who cares? I mean, those are the things. Back to the public-private partnership stuff where it's like we're just going to have to, cut our teeth a bit here and just make it happen. So that's my proposal is for sure, Randy. Number one, move it to the front, and then maybe adding in the policy itself when I can expect that your staff will get back to me on a review. But that way, at least at the bare minimum, if I'm an applicant, developer, builder, I come in, I don't have engineers making excuses. Of who's to blame here. George's the worst, and those guys don't know what they're doing, whatever, right? Well, who knows at this point? But if there's some structure, and then it's like, well, the city's giving you stuff back every 10 days or 4, whatever, and we've been out for 2 months. That's not the city's problem. Now as a developer builder, there's a very concrete, transparent way to see, okay, if the city's really doing this, hey, engineer team, we're in 3 months. Now I know we're 5 months in. Right, that's like 5 months in. What's that worth to us? Being 5 months into review, right? It starts helping both sides a little bit.
But did you take note of what George said a few minutes ago about the engineering and their specifications? So let me question you about that. So you're telling me that the city does not have a spec sheet that goes out to the client that already details our requirements.
We do. We do
Okay.
in the form of
But
the
they're
general
not asking.
engineering standards. But
Right.
It's a list of all of the requirements for everything.
But you just
what
said
we
that
don't do is have specific components that are pre-approved, like we do with the model home design for building permits.
Right.
We review your house. You give us 3 different sets of house plans. We review 3 sets of house plans. You build 90 houses using 3 different floor plans. You only get 3 plan reviews, those 3. The rest of it's a much faster turnaround. There may be a possibility of doing the same thing with engineering. And I haven't spent any time with the engineering department talking.
Well, I misunderstood you then because I thought what you said is one of the hangups is receiving the blueprints in and they're not engineered as per our specifications in the city. So now they've got to be kicked back
Right.
out.
And that does happen sometimes.
Yeah, so
sometimes
how-
they will submit plans to us that don't follow the general engineering standards that were adopted by council.
Right.
And
So
we
then
kick them
that's
out if they don't.
That's a message to all workforce housing builders out there. When you hire your architect, make sure they come down to the city of Prescott and get all this information before they charge you for a set of blueprints that isn't quite there. That's a 60-day minimum issue, what he's talking about right there. By the time you get your red lines back and you go back to your engineer, you wait in line, you get them kicked back out. That is something that needs to stop because that is a huge problem.
Yeah, and that's partly the fault of various different areas of the state having different requirements for things. So an architect who usually works in the south side of the state is suddenly working up here may find that our requirements are different, and then they have to relearn our requirements through the process.
Yeah.
And it takes longer if you don't use someone who's local. It really does.
Well,
Okay.
the city has a handout for almost all this,
Oh, yeah.
but
And we
it's
s-
your engineer, not your architect, but it's actually your engineer's responsibility to take that handout and make it work for your site. What he's saying is,
right.
like my site, I had to have more pressure relief because I had more head pressure than his site. So there is nuances, right?
Yeah.
They're not, you can't just boilerplate them because it doesn't work. But there's a city handout for everything that we do. We just have to have an engineer that's smart enough to adapt our site to those handouts. And then smooth sailing.
And they need to be made aware of it.
And if
Sometimes they
you
don't.
if you have anything, almost anything larger than a single family home or a minor commercial tenant improvement, you're going to go through a pre-application review with us. And the engineering department spells out where to look for things during that pre-application process. So they'll tell you, go look in the general engineering standards. They're published on the city's website, just like all of our other codes, and find the requirements that you're going to have to design to. But that doesn't always happen. And we get plans in and we have to do a review, again, based on us looking at our investment, because once you build it and give it to us, it belongs to the citizens and the taxpayers forever.
Personally, I don't see a way to change that, guys. I just think pushing it to the front of the line, that's your incentive right there.
That will save considerable time depending
I'll give you
on.
the example of
agree,
$1 million
yeah.
bucks. I got $1 million bucks tied up in my next development right now. Every day, I'm losing money. Every minute of every day, I'm losing money on that $1 million bucks. I gotta make it up on the far end because I realize some appreciation because I build it into the development, and hopefully it happens. If the economy crashes, I'm in big trouble. But the point is, I'm losing that money every day. So if we can speed that process up, that's a huge incentive for workforce, I think.
Well-
And I know the other developers are gonna grumble, but in a few years after George educates them, they'll just know that's how it is. And they'll accept it and we'll all move on.
Well, when they have a full staff, they'll appreciate it.
That's the message we have to get out.
Yeah.
And it's
What-
simpler.
What do you feel like is a realistic response time, if we would consider that?
I think you're going to have a hard time putting a
Well, there's
single
statute.
time frame on something when projects come at different scales.
Yeah.
That's where I think you're going to run into a problem saying you have to respond in 10 days or you have to respond in 3 weeks to a plan review. It depends on the scale of the project. If you get a subdivision in Deepwell Ranch that's 300 lots, it's going to take a lot longer than if it's a workforce housing 100 lot subdivision, just because of the scale of the project. I don't know that I'd be comfortable picking a specific time frame. I think moving projects to the front of the line in front of anyone else who may be waiting, that doesn't mean stopping a review of a project to take up a workforce housing, but it means the next project we
Sure,
go to
the
is
next one in the
workforce
queue.
housing
Yeah.
project is a good way to speed up the process.
you wouldn't
and you're
wanna
right,
stop.
you're going to make people mad, but I mean, I work for the city government. Everybody's mad at us all the time anyway.
But if you're repetitive and you bring forth maybe 10, duplexes or whatever, it's reviewed and permitted once.
It
and you
gets
come
easier
back-
Sure.
and easier, yes.
It'd almost be worth saying in the policy, Amber, and I don't know if you want to throw this in there, but probably something like, if you're going to come and make this a model that you can reproduce, the first time you go through, the city's going to use you as a model review, right? I mean, that would be almost something to just mention up front. Like, if you're good at doing this type of housing, duplexes or 8-unit infill projects or whatever, it's best you come to us on the first one and we model it all out so that on the ones following that, you're only getting faster, right?
And
Then
we
it's
like
only-
that concept anyway. Internally,
Sure.
people won't believe this, but we would rather not spend a whole lot of extra time reviewing your plans if it's the same plan we reviewed last time. We'd rather use the model process because that lets us move on to the next project.
And so at that point, if that were to be done, John, then you'd just have a site plan review. How long could you just flip out a site plan review?
In most cases, that's a couple of weeks at the outside, but
Yeah.
it can be,
So
as
think
far
about
as
that.
actual
That's
staff
huge.
time,
Yeah.
shorter.
I mean, if there's not going to be any teeth to it as far as a response time, the only reason I propose that is because ADEQ, ADWR, state organizations do have those, right? They'll say, hey, you submit the application, we will get back to you in 30 days or 60, 90 days, whatever it is. And so I figured following in their footsteps gives the builder developer a little bit more sense of what is my time frame here. And, no one's just pointing fingers at each other.
And we may be able to do that, but it will be different between a 200 lot subdivision and a 30 lot subdivision. So those
Okay.
timeframes may be different.
Would you be able to help us out as a committee to maybe give us that threshold? Even if you say, hey, if we're under this amount of units, I think even if it's just one of those thresholds.
there's no science to get you there, so
Okay.
it's going to be a little bit of
Okay.
art to figure out a time frame that the committee could recommend
All right.
to the city. But I can talk to the other departments to find out
What do you
just
guys-
what their limitations.
Do you folks feel like it's even worth it, or do we just want to have consensus on pushing it up to the front of the
I
line?
think you got to be really careful with that one, John, because when you tell me 14 days and the
Well,
plan
sure.
checker took a week
Yeah.
off on vacation,
Yeah.
now I'm threatening to sue you as a city.
Oh, no.
Whereas if you just tell me as a builder, hey, you're going to the front of the line, I'm skipping out of City Hall, pretty happy guy.
Yeah.
I would be very careful with
Okay.
that. I mean, we're a small municipality here. We can't do things like what a state can do.
Yeah.
They got more people.
Invitation
Yeah.
to litigation.
Yeah, for
Exactly,
sure.
exactly,
Okay.
yeah.
So
What about like in the middle and we just say on average, right? On average,
Certainly
if it's
could do
a
that.
single family, on average, if it's a,
I think we can come up with some information on averages like that for you to consider, but I like that better just because it does give us some flexibility. And again, if we have people out, I mean, the building department for the city of Prescott has 2 3/4 reviewers. That's who reviews every single building permit that comes in for anything that requires a building permit.
yeah, and that's true. That's been a problem.
And
with
there's
the
only 2
staff.
planners.
Like, you could be on this 14-day whatever, and then now you're outsourcing reviews, and then you're like, crap.
We only
no.
have 3 building
Yeah, and if we
inspectors.
start outsourcing, your timeframes are going to go up.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not going to go
It's
down.
so fun. It's the best. You got it, Matt.
A couple things that I would think we could implement for, the city has a engineering standard, and that's set in stone, so all civil and architects understand that. A couple things that have delayed a couple of my developments have been discretionary. So, well, we'd really like to see this extra water line. Well, that cost me 6 months to redesign, to add, to go back and forth and say, no, I don't want the extra water line. Well, we want you to have the extra water line. Well, I don't want it. It happened during COVID, so it made it longer.
That's a good point.
A couple, on the next one was, well, I need this line here so that I can see how tall this wall is. Well, you can see how tall it is. You just, so it's, if a workforce housing one comes in addition to going to the front of the line, maybe there's no discretionary, because the engineer can go back and forth with our engineer and say, well, I like to see it this way, I like to see it this way. But if we can just say, okay, this is what the code says, this is what it's going to be, period, dot, end of story, you could do discretionary on non-workforce housing, but on workforce housing, we're just going to go by the book, and that'll speed up the plan review.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's moving it up and then almost informing the staff to go, look, we don't have time to waste here, and we don't have discretionary points that we really want to bring up. If it meets the code, it's done. Like, you streamline it, you move on, whatever. Because it's not really at that point, there's no liability to the taxpayer or the city or anything. It's by engineering standards.
Yeah.
Right? All of them are. All of them are. And quite honestly, it's the same for me too. If I look at the amount of time that's ballooned during whether it's either the entitlement stage or the technical review stage, I would venture to say 50% or more is discretionary items, where you're like, we gave you a full set of plans that meets all of the engineering codes, but all the things that we keep talking about are the things that are not required by engineering code.
Why are we doing that? I don't get that.
In my case, it was a third water line to a subdivision that connected 2 different pressure zones and evened it out and stopped a dead end. And it did a lot of positive things for the city, there's no question. But my particular subdivision had the proper fire flows, had 2 water lines already to it, and so I fought it because it cost me a lot of money to put that water line in. The city wanted it because it's going to cost them to put it in later or maintain it. So I understand those 2 things. But if this is a workforce housing development, and this was a lower cost development, so we're not charging top dollar, but it's still inexpensive by today's standards. The point being, that one water line increased the cost of all the houses. So that's an example that is very specific, but can be applied broadly to the discretionary items.
Yeah.
But are we doing that, George? I mean, we're really not supposed to be doing that.
I don't know.
If it's code, it's code. And that's the level playing field I talk about a lot. If we've got the code, we've got the requirements,
Yes, you're doing.
Does somebody have the ability to go back and just arbitrarily say, oh, I'd like a third one there, a third water line? I mean, they shouldn't be able to do that anyway.
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
We don't do it in planning. I can talk about planning. We
Okay.
don't do it in building because I can talk about building.
It's the engineering, but the point is, those city staffers have to sign off on my project. And if they don't sign off on my project because we're having a discretionary argument about one or two different things, then it holds up the whole project. You know, the particular individual who did that is no longer at the city. That's neither here nor there. My point is, if it benefits the city and it's going to lower impact fees in the long run, I can see where a discretionary item, but just like John, most of the things that hold up any kind of my development or even houses, you know, the house permits for that matter, usually end up being discretionary that aren't specific to the land development code. But while the land development code's going to change,
Sure.
so we're going to move it to that now or whatever it is. It's just, if we can apply that to workforce housing and staff understands, hey, you know, we know where the code's going, but right now this is in here now, and this is what the engineering standards say.
And you hit it on the head. It's usually that's the rebuttal, right, or the reasoning is
Right.
like, well, we see the future ahead 20 years because you do in engineering, public works, city, water, streets, roads, whatever. So they're all basing the changes of a particular project to the changes that will come based on, I know we have an improvement project down the street here, blah, blah, blah. It'd be great to bring a line in, whatever.
But I think at that point, if it has not been imposed or instituted,
Yeah, well,
that
sure.
you have the option of saying no, and we can talk with our city attorney.
Yeah.
Well,
on
and I'm just saying for workforce housing, that's the way it really should be. A lot of times we acquiesce because it's like, well, I need my project approved and I need the time and.
Well, sure. At some point, you get to the point where you're like, well, I'm just going to be doing what you're requiring because you're signing off on the project. I've lost 6 months. Like, get this over with. So, I mean, is that something? So, if we're going to add it up to the list, I don't know what the mechanism is to be able to communicate that, George. But to be like,
Can I add one more thing, though?
yeah, go
And I
ahead.
don't mean to always be the other side, but we're going to promise our citizens this is workforce housing. We don't want to get so undiscretionary that we end up with a ghetto 20 years down the line. So keep that in the back of your minds.
I don't disagree, but the houses in Prescott Heights were super simple. They're super clean. They're being regentrified, and every ghetto in the United States is being regentrified, and it's going to be what it's going to be. I disagree.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, to create workforce housing, it needs to be simple. And I mean, I don't want to call it a ghetto. It's just simple housing.
But
lower
remember what
ceilings.
we're going to promise if we go out to the public, like we've talked about many times, and we're going to promise them that this isn't Section 8. And of course, it's not going to be, but I'm not talking about in the first 2 or 3 years. I'm talking about for the next 20 years. So
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not disagreeing with you guys. I'm
Yeah.
just saying something else to throw into the
But
mix.
just something to keep in mind too, like for me as a builder, Randy, I'll tell you the most frustrating part is that every year or a couple years, everybody wants to adopt the newest, biggest thing, right? Energy code standards, architectural this, whatever. It only drives the cost up of building, right? So for me, it's like, I don't think that the standards of engineering are really going to pose that big of a problem down the road. Now you're talking more maybe aesthetic stuff, how you build the actual structure. I think what we're talking here is just no discretionary in the code being the code. If it's this water line and I don't need to loop it, I don't loop it. Like we don't have to have that conversation. Like, so I don't know the mechanism of how it works is really what I'm most concerned about though. I agree with it moving up to the top of the line and also just being able to say, look, the goal here is speed. And to accomplish that it's black and white. The code is black and white here. Now, granted, do I blame engineers to doing an absolute
No.
great job for the city to try to look ahead and be efficient and make taxpayer money go the mile? Absolutely. But that's the give and take here. It's like, but now this is workforce housing and we need these folks to just expedite this process.
I'm
So-
just looking at what's ballooned my projects, and then most of the time it's discretionary. So
Yeah.
if we can take that out of workforce housing, that will save a ton of time and money.
I think we're all in agreement on that one.
Okay. All right. So the consensus is we'll have we're putting it on the notepad, right, for the policy to say that workforce housing projects will move up to the front of the line in all stages. Do you guys agree? Entitlement, technical, everything, building.
What about deferment on permit fees and all that?
Yeah. Just like we talked, I mean, the part with the fees is just coming back to look through some of the stuff that Amber's going to send out from other municipalities just to figure out what scale, what unit percentage and that kind of stuff. So that's not determined yet.
The only concern that I would say is, we want to make sure there's some teeth tied to it. Like if you get, hey, I'm going to do a workforce housing subdivision and gets moved to the front of the line, and then lo and behold, I don't do workforce housing. What's the repercussion? So I don't know what that is. I just want to bring it up.
I think that's going to be hammered out in the legal side for sure. There has to be some penalty, if you will, if you go about wasting all of our time.
We'll probably set up a different application process that has a commitment as part of that application. That way we get something in writing from you that we can hold you to that will keep you from changing your mind.
And you have to pay it all back if you.
Well, no, I mean, that's.
And we'll be
kind of-
mean to you from now on if you.
Yeah.
Right.
By tying those deferred fees, that's city
Yeah.
leverage.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, we're partners on this. So you're gonna stay in the workforce model, we're gonna do this, we're partners. Because
Yeah. There'll be a contractual arrangement.
what I don't wanna see, and I know you guys all feel the same way, is that we do this workforce saying, moving up to the front of the line, he builds a workforce, and 2 years later it goes to market. That doesn't work.
I mean, I don't mind that on the single family side of things. I just,
Really, that's one workforce person that lives there and the next person's at market.
I mean, you could tie it, but that has to sunset. Meaning, if you're gonna say it stays at workforce or it can only increase by a certain percentage every year, that deed restriction, in my opinion, personally, needs to sunset, whether it be 5 years or 10 years. I know we're all talking about the LIHTC that sunsetted in 20 years. That's a totally different situation. That's an investment property that took advantage of a grant program. I'm talking about single family where I sell it to an individual. I want that individual to be able to increase over time. That's the biggest wealth creator for the,
You guys have to
United
hammer
States.
that out,
So
though.
that's something that for single family development, you can put a restriction on the increase, because if I'm the developer, I too would want to sell it at market rate. But if I'm going to sell it less expensive, I understand. I want it to not increase as much, but that particular deed restriction, I think, should sunset at some point.
Well, I agree, but not short, not 1 year, 2 years.
No, not 1 year or 2 year.
It's
It
gotta
should
be out there a bit.
a little bit. I don't know what that time frame is, but
All right. Sorry, I need to
Sorry.
bring us back in. Those are all things in the headers and stuff that we'll definitely going to hit. That's a big legal side. All the enforceability side is probably going to be one whole meeting of just like what teeth do we give all these components of the policy. I don't want to have us here forever, so we got some decisions to make. So, are you guys good with closing out fee, Howard? I know that you sent comments for ADUs and for.
Comment on this item, this particular item, I'd like to comment now before you close this.
Can I just ask you to consider to do your comment for the two topics at once?
Which two topics?
There's no formal action here, so I'd like to, if you can just speak on both of your topics that you kind of sent comments about.
Yeah, I had,
And I know it's not your favorite, but we will put 3 minutes up on the board, so.
Howard Mechanic. I did have two items I wanted to comment on, and that was plus this particular one was a different one, so there's three, and I'll make very, very brief.
Okay.
As far as the fees, what I'm thinking, I know you've asked 5 times, can we get the impact fees rebated? Can we get the impact fees rebated? What you can do is have the impact fees and these other fees paid by the city. And then you pay the city back if you're putting in workforce housing. You pay the city back over a period of time. So this is the first time I realized that you can actually do something with the impact fees. And legal can disagree with me, and maybe I'm wrong. But if it's paid by the city, then it's paid and you conform to state law. And then you finance that amount over a period of time. So that's my suggestion on that.
Okay.
And it should be based on a percentage of the project that is workforce. I know there was discussion, and Arnold was mentioning that he doesn't want to see somebody say, get the same break if they put in 20% as if they put in 80%. So if you're putting in 20% workforce, you can finance 20% of your total cost. If you're putting in 80% of workforce housing in your project, you finance the fees and the impact fees and costs for 80% of your project. And I think that's a fair way to do it. As far as water, I want to briefly comment.
We can't pick this one because it's not.
Yeah, if you can just hold back on water, we're going
I
to
thought-
agendize that for the next, we're not going to have time to go through it, and we also had staff that was supposed to be here.
Okay,
we
so
will
which
table
two
that.
items did you say? I should comment?
ADU?
Not yet. We haven't gone through ADU.
Okay, so that's good for public comment, and we'll have you back up.
For
if you
ADU?
can- For ADU, please, yeah.
And let me just briefly say, I know that you brought, that water thing was on the agenda.
Yep,
If you can, I think it could be disposed of pretty quickly just by asking the Water Issues Committee to look into this and see if that policy can be, some type of policy can be used. I think that isn't for this committee. I think it's for the water issues. I'm just suggesting that you do put it back on the agenda for today, just to say, please, as an official motion, to ask the Water Issues Committee to look at it.
gotcha. Thank you, Mr. Mechanic. We have 3 items left. We have water policy, which I would recommend we table because we didn't have them show up. And there's a lot of questions that I'm sure we have as a committee to do that. And then there's also ADUs and community outreach. I mean, it's 11:43. So if you guys are up for it, maybe at 15, the rest of the time till noon, we can hammer one out. Or what are you guys thinking? We could table the rest. We could table water for sure. And then we have community outreach and ADUs.
So quick suggestion on the ADU. So the ADU one is actually more to just, we can gather feedback, or if anybody just wants to bring their notes to the planning and zoning meeting that's next week. Because planning and zoning will actually be the ones who can make any changes
Sure.
to it. So if you aren't able to attend the planning and zoning meeting, you can send me your comments and we can read them there as well if you want something changed or updated. So we don't actually need to go too in-depth on that one because we can't actually change anything on that one.
We already made a
We're-
recommendation
we're-
anyway, didn't we, John?
I don't think it was an official recommendation. I think we had language, didn't we?
Nicole, didn't we
Yeah.
go to council with a recommendation?
They approved the goal. So that was going to be my question. They still have to, council still has to approve the language ultimately, right? So what is planning and zoning? They're just an extra vote or conversation?
So it's incorporated into the land development code, which is the zoning code for the city. It has to be amended through an ordinance process. So it goes to planning commission for review and recommendation, then it goes to city council for the ordinance change. So we have a draft of the language, which we're sending to the planning and zoning commission that you have also. If you have suggestions on that, you can come to the meeting, you can get the comments to us, and we'll move it forward. The intent of it was to make as few changes as possible in order to make it as easy as possible to get through the process. We had 2 different versions of this. I don't know if you noticed in your packet, this one's called the short version. The long version, we had way more criteria in. But anything that you add to this process to make it more complicated will also make it less likely to happen. So as simple as possible is the approach we took.
So once they review it next week, will it be on the agenda for the very next council meeting?
As soon as we
Potentially?
can get it on council, there's certain timeframes to get things into an agenda packet, so we will get it to the next available council meeting after.
I personally like the simplicity. I don't know how you guys feel, but
Anybody have like specific points to that language? Anything that sticks out?
Yeah, the bullet point D here, the guest quarters of the ADUs and the primary residence shall share the utilities. Separate utility members, or excuse me, meters shall not be allowed.
So that language is the current language in the code for guest quarters. It is to tie the guest quarters to the main property so that there's no, there's a disincentive for people to rent them out illegally. That kind of becomes a little moot with and I know most of you understand that a few years ago the state came in and stepped all over local zoning and said anyone can turn an accessory dwelling unit or a residential home in a single family neighborhood into a vacation rental, effectively making them hotel rooms. Many of the criteria we had here protecting residential neighborhoods were no longer applicable because of that state change. The impacts on neighborhoods have all happened as a result of the change to statutes allowing for short-term rental. We just want to allow for long-term rental for the same thing. Mandating an additional water meter is an additional cost and is a disincentive to create an ADU. It's easier to just leave it alone and not create an ADU rather than pay for a water meter. So that was one of the reasons we didn't recommend a change to that.
Okay.
So, John, yeah.
Connie? Yeah.
So, George, how similar is this ADU code to the one in Phoenix? Because it seems like there's a lot of stuff missing. Like the distance requirement is.
Phoenix went way beyond this
Yeah.
with their proposal.
Okay.
Most of what they were doing was trying to use ADUs, to obtain ADUs, but at the same time disincentivize the short-term rentals. So with Phoenix, they've stuck their neck out and we're waiting to see if they ever get sued on it. Limiting the short-term rental use on a single property to the main house and not allowing you to short-term rent your ADU. It has to be a long-term rental unit. That hasn't been tested in court yet. We're waiting
No,
to
but
see
in
what
addition to
happens.
that, they had building specifications in terms that they're being sued over it, that they didn't address the height limit. And I think we should probably,
We do. Accessory dwellings are limited to 20 feet.
It says it on
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
And we address setbacks as well. So all of that criteria is already addressed because it was in place for guest quarters.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Okay.
Again, why we didn't want to make too many changes, we had criteria in place.
So piggybacking on what Arnold just mentioned about the separate meter, would it be fair to say that if they wanted to, if somebody was building an ADU from start, right, and maybe they found a property that had, an ample lot where they could do this, and they're thinking, wow, for me, this could be house hacking, right? Because now if I can get a renter in here in this ADU, it can help me pay for my mortgage. That's not very attainable. Wouldn't it be nice if they were allowed to do a separate utility meter if they wanted to, maybe not required, but
So
just allowed?
change the language to make it discretionary
Shall be allowed.
rather than,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't have any objection to that as long as it's not mandated to have a separate connection to utilities. One of the problems with saying an additional meter is unless it's a sub-metering situation, which is entirely discretionary on the private property owner because it doesn't attach to the city system. Requiring a new meter and a new connection to the city system to have separate utilities means a new impact fee. And as soon as we start charging you $10,000 in impact fees to connect one of these units up, not much point having the unit that way.
Yeah.
So we could make the language more clear about discretionary internal water meters, the sub-metering thing
Sub-metering is the
that
way
we've
they
talked
do it.
about. That's something that a property owner could do anyway.
No, I know.
Yeah.
So that's,
And it's worth noting too, I just wanted to comment too that from a workforce and housing committee perspective, this is really in the hands of P&Z, right? It's almost like really an opportune time that we get to breathe in something to that process. So it's really, just to keep us on the same page, it's what we can, for lack of a better word, leverage, right, for the production of workforce housing units. I know a lot of it there's been concerns about the limitation of short-term rent, like what is this going to do in a square mile of how many units can go up and whatever. I mean, those are things that are going to be hammered out in the PNZ and council and stuff. My question to the committee is just, is there anything we from creating, facilitating, trying to produce more workforce housing units could do for ADUs? And the only thing that I thought of was, well, okay, it's like utilize the topics that are going to be the hot topics for ADUs during the public process, and then go and say, okay, well, parking. Well, what if the Workforce Housing Committee recommends that for a workforce housing unit, an ADU unit, we allow the tandem parking, right? Existing tandem parking is allowed if it's a workforce housing unit. That would be that's one of my recommendations. Would it be something that we can entertain to the private property owner to say, okay, so there's a private property owner that says, I want an ADU. How can we gain their support or incentivize them enough to make it available to workforce housing? Well, then maybe we revisit those fees, right? Maybe the process of for one, you're expedited, so it's quick, and the other thing is that we also maybe the fees help you be deferred, not maybe 5-10 years because you're not looking at a large development project, but maybe there's a little bit of some relief to that private property owner to be able to say, I will offer my ADU unit for the workforce housing cause. Now, granted, the biggest thing I can't overcome right now, which I know will come in time, is the enforceability side, right? Is like, how do we know there's a workforce, which is doable with a full-time person, right? That's one of those items that get tacked onto the list of going, we are now securing many ADUs for workforce housing. And I get yearly paperwork, and these are the folks that, rent that place out or whatnot. So that's just another thought is to be able to incentivize them just as we would a builder or developer to maybe go the workforce housing route on ADUs.
That's going to be your pushback, though, is the parking. So tell
Yeah.
me again what you were proposing as a change.
So in that code, it's talking about one off-street parking space shall be required for each guest quarters / ADU, in addition to that required for the primary dwelling unit. I'm saying if I have plenty of parking, right? Like I have space, I only have one car. It's discretionary to that site. If I'm an existing primary residence there and I have spot for 3 cars in my lot, because that's just how it is, I shouldn't be required to add another parking spot on the back alley side. I should just be allowed to go, this nurse, firefighter, police officer, workforce housing person rents the ADU, they park next to me in my parking lot.
So
Existing parking.
from an enforcement standpoint, from the zoning side of it, when we look at it, we're going to look at your property and say, okay, you have a single-family home, you have to have 2 parking spaces. Code says 2. If you have an ADU, you have to have 3. You don't have to add 1 to any number of spaces you already have unless you don't already have those spaces available. So if you had room for 3 spaces with a single-family home and you add an ADU, one of those spaces counts for the ADU automatically. We're counting totals. 2 for the house, 1 for each ADU. And if that can be put anywhere on the site, we don't require parking spaces to be paved for single-family property. It can be a spot in the yard, as long as it's something that we can identify as a parking space and it's accessible. You can drive to it.
And George, here's why I asked. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac guidelines for mortgage lending a lot of times refers to the jurisdiction having authority, okay, and they really default to that.
Mm-hmm.
So when we go to develop this, it can really make or break the difference in financing options, whether that loan application can be submitted to purchase or build a investment property versus a second home, okay? Because there's nothing there's some flexibilities if the local building jurisdiction has permitted it.
Mhm.
Then you can go back to underwriting and say, look, this meets this particular criteria because the city of Prescott allows it to be done this way. So with that said, that's why I asked about the meters, but I also don't see in here about construction type, whether this can be modular or whether it is site-built.
So there are other criteria that control the type of construction allowed within different zones within the city, within geographic areas of the city. For most of our community, we allow for site-built or modular, that is factory-built to building code standards, anywhere that you're allowed. We have an overlay district that allows manufactured housing, which is built to a different standard than the building code. So we have criteria set up now already in place that controls the principal type of building that you can put in that would also apply to any of these structures as well.
So that extends to the
It's-
ADU.
It goes beyond just this particular section of the code to control it via the map, the zoning map, as well as criteria for how we define site build and single-family homes. So again, we allow modular construction and site built as equivalent things, and manufactured is subject to an overlay district to be able to put a manufactured home in. But if you're in a manufactured home district, you would be able to use, for instance, a park model as guest quarters because the park model counts as a manufactured home.
Okay.
But doesn't it have to be on a slab?
No, not for a park model.
Okay, so the fixture-
If it's in a manufactured home overlay, it has to meet the minimum requirements for a manufactured home. Yeah.
Let's go back to meters for a second, guys, because I just got asked by somebody that APS is not going to set 2 meters in a single-family dwelling anyway. It's got to be zoned a duplex to get 2 meters, so it's always going to be tied, so it's a moot point. If it's a duplex, it's no longer an ADU, it's a duplex.
Yeah.
So, there you go.
Well, yeah, but I don't think
I'm not entirely sure of that.
I don't think APS will. So for
I think APS will put a meter in.
yeah, for example, Randy, if you're on a multifamily lot, right? But which there's a lot of them. There's a lot of multifamily lots, medium and high density in this within city limits that might just have one residential home on it.
If it's zoned it's zoned, not single-family.
That's what they.
Talking about single-family with ADU, right, guys? Am I missing?
That is actually important nuance. ADUs are an additional
Additional.
dwelling unit on a single-family
There you
zoned
go.
property. If it's multifamily zoned, you can have a second unit on it by right. It has to meet all of the development criteria, but you can have a second unit by right. And that second unit counts as a principal unit under our zoning code. This criteria applies to single-family zoning only.
Yeah.
So
No, I
something
understand
to
that
keep
it's
in
to
mind.
that single family zoning, but what I'm saying is APS doesn't dig that deep on the zoning side. I think on the zoning side for them is like reading the code through of like, well, is this still just an attachment to this unit or not? I'd never had them do that to me. They just go and say, oh, this is a multifamily lot. And so you have 2 structures here. You're asking for a second meter as a multifamily lot to rent that one out? Sure.
Yeah, but we're
We were talking about single
talking
family.
about single-family.
Oh, I see. So that's all you're, yeah.
That's what I'm saying. You can't get a second meter on a single-family.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do it. APS won't do it.
But you can, for accounting purposes, if you have a tenant, you can sub-meter it.
Sure,
So
yeah.
you can,
Right.
okay.
Just like you can do with water.
And with water, yeah. Yeah. On the topic of the construction type, which Arnold brought up, I mean, and I know this is kind of to me, it's a little more personal too, because we always get discriminated as, the factory build guys, right? But it seems to be a lot of multifamily lots that are not MH overlay, that are within the same character of the neighborhood in the same areas. So I just don't know. I guess my question was, is P&Z considering looking at, because I think in the notes, or I had in the notes somewhere, that they might want to just look at certain overlay districts, right? Certain density districts where they're just like, hey, we're not going to touch all the stuff that's in subdivisions that are padded, right? Pads, maybe our common residential single family lots, but maybe in the multifamily, space, because a lot of the downtown stuff has multifamily.
It does.
And a lot of it, and you know this because I've expressed my frustration with it, a lot of it is not an MH, which doesn't allow, because quite honestly, as far as cost effectiveness, like a park model, right? All you got to do is put language that it has to look similar to the primary. You paint it the same. You built stick-built rectangle or you do a park model, you're going to spend less money on the park model, buying it from the factory. So it is a cost savings to be able to do that. And so I guess I would obviously, and maybe that's just me on personally, that has to be involved on the ADU language side, is just to be able to voice that, because I feel like it's very low hanging fruit based on how the zoning map of the city looks and what could be done with ADUs. Again, that's for workforce housing. I mean, I know most people's concerns are about the short-term rental stuff. I can't fix that problem. They got to figure that out. But from a workforce housing perspective, that is the lowest hanging fruit, cost effective. I mean, that's the most cost effective way to do it.
I agree with you, but under the current proposal, we haven't touched the ability to use a manufactured home as far as the ADUs go, and the limitations that are placed by the zoning map on where you can do it. So this doesn't do that yet. Maybe it could include that.
Yeah.
I think it will make it more difficult to get past the public.
Sure.
In the official processes when we go to P&Z and then to council, to allow manufactured units as opposed to a modular or site-built unit.
Sure.
But, I mean, I'm open to try it.
Anything else on ADU? No? Randy's like, I'd rather not talk. All right. Okay. Yeah, Howard, go ahead. Well, thank you. We've been here a while, so I appreciate
I was
that.
brief last time.
Man, I didn't think we were going to go that long.
George, you mentioned the lawsuit. Is there a lawsuit in Phoenix yet or not? Was that?
I don't believe there's one relating to.
Because that's over a year old. All right, that law.
It'll be a year old in November.
Okay, they passed a law in Phoenix. It has not been challenged by anybody.
Yeah, it has.
Is it in court?
Yeah, it's getting ready to go, and you can look it up. I'll tell you about it later.
Okay. All right. So my point is the major, and a lot of this can be addressed at P&Z, so I don't want to go into the details here. I just want to let everybody know that there is a concern that this is going to cause a proliferation of bed and breakfasts, which people don't want. The Airbnbs. That's a concern that council mentioned at your joint meeting. So you're not putting anything in here like Phoenix did. Maybe you don't want to stick your neck out.
Waiting to see if Phoenix got sued for
So you don't want to put anything in there requiring at least 50% of the lot be owner occupied or anything like that.
That wasn't the choice at this time.
Thanks, Howard. Amber, do we need a motion to table or push out agenda items? Matt, do we need a motion because they were agendized?
Can I say something for 2 minutes?
Oh, yeah.
Does anybody,
To which one? Sorry.
Just to the last item.
Okay.
Community, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, let me, yeah.
Put it back on, then we don't have to worry about
That's fine.
tabling
Yep,
it.
so let's just move over to 3F right now regarding community outreach and communications. Go for it.
I just wanted to say, with the thought that we're gearing up, all this work that we're doing right now is gearing up to have a formal presentation to council to really have some teeth around the whole purpose that we're here, right? This is like we're getting into the important work, which I think is exciting for us. But as a sidebar to that, I really think it's timely that we're engaging with the community now and not waiting until 3, 4, or 5 months from now, because we should really be building more awareness. I mean, we've got some people that are committed that are here every time. I don't know how many people are watching these meetings from home, but we need to be building some community excitement and consensus about what we're doing, because I'll say my vision, when whomever is going to be presenting to council about our objectives, I want that room filled with people who are excited about this. And so we've got to be doing that work now to start building that. I was talking to George earlier, and he mentioned that maybe there's a bit of fatigue about coming to these in-person meetings with the general plan and the tax things that are going on right now. So one suggestion is that maybe we schedule like a virtual town hall kind of a meeting on the topic of workforce housing. So my suggestion is, can we look at a date, maybe between emails or Amber or whatever, but like November, so that we're really actively doing something. And that could be just catching them up to speed on what we have done so far and then getting feedback or whatnot.
I like it.
Maybe get the courier.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in support of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about that? I mean, quite honestly, it's the same concept of going to council prematurely, right? And being like, here's what we're thinking. And then just going to the public and getting their feedback. And I think that's really where we're going to understand what the bigger pain points are to the public, right? I mean, it's no different than a neighborhood meeting. You go to a neighborhood meeting and you get, fix our roads. And then I'm like, what?
We'll advertise it as affordable housing in every neighborhood.
There you go. You get a lot of people.
It'll
Let's
sink
go,
that ship.
George.
Whatever gets people there, George.
And then one last comment. I haven't read the new general plan draft. Has anyone read it? Besides
Website is planprescott.com.
Plan Prescott.org.
And
Yeah.
from there, you can actually see the virtual meeting room where you can put comments in, and you can read the entire document either in PDF form or an online form and give us comments. So please
This will be
do.
required for all of you.
yes, I would love
Yeah,
for everybody
the
to read
comments
it.
are anonymous to other people, but we see if you did it or not.
Nice.
And I just want to say one more thing, if I may. I was looking at it this morning and I was a little surprised by some of the language on the page. It says, as the overarching paragraph before the document, the general plan organizes the required and volunteer elements under the following chapters based on Prescott's livability goals. With the increased impacts of climate disruption, it is becoming more and more obvious that we need to cultivate resilience. I have to say it's a little surprising because I feel like that's a very subjective statement to make before a very important document for the city. So I, again, highly encourage everybody to read this and give comments back.
Where are we at on the comment period? It's a 60-day comment period, but do we know where we're at?
It just started last week.
It did? Okay.
Yeah, so it's only a week into the 60 days.
Well, here you
It's
go,
a living,
folks.
moving document, so make your comments.
Yep.
Yeah.
Plan
Plan Prescott. Right. Yeah, we'll just go ahead. So, yeah, if you guys are good, we'll just table the water policy for next meeting. What's that?
Do I do that now?
Well, we still have the last one is updates. Sorry. So we'll close down the discussion and action items. Go over to Amber real quick for updates.
So quick updates, council meeting Tuesday. I know it is fall break, so totally get that. But if anybody can be there, that'd be great. John's going to present. We received quotes for the housing needs assessment. We have chosen one that aligns more with what we actually need to get done. It's under the threshold, but we're still going to bring an update to council. The main discussion for Tuesday is, per the agreement the council approved, we have to have a position, whether it's a full-time employee, contract employee, or consultant position, is what's up for discussion. But we do have to have something. So that's where council is going to give direction, but I would definitely say, your recommendation for a full-time position has been passed on through the agenda. But if you are available to come, that would be good. Housing needs assessment, touched on that. We do have one that Prescott Valley is actually using the same company as well. So we'll actually be able to get a regional view of everything. So that's really beneficial because they got the grant too. So that's cool. Policy, we'll keep bringing chunks of it. It sounds like we have a good discussion to have at the next one. But over the next couple months, we'll be hitting policy hard. We'll be bringing you examples. I'll send you guys Tucson and Flagstaff again. If you come up or come across a different policy that you really like, send it to me. I'll send it out to the committee. So we'll take examples and then we're gonna create drafts of what we think might work here, but you will not hurt our feelings if you're like, we hate that, do something different. Totally fine. So don't think anything we send is gonna be set in stone. It's completely fluid. I think that's it.
Cool. Anything else? All right. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate your time.
Graph.
Oh, I get it.